And I'm here with former University of Washington men's basketball player Travis Rice. Travis, what's going on, my man? How you doing today?
I'm doing well. I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited to get you on. I think you've got a very interesting story. I heard a lot about you, and I'm very interested and curious to just dive into it. But I want to first get into kind of your last year playing for the Huskies and having to deal with COVID. And I'm sure that was a headache and a half to deal with. What was it like for you personally, with it being your last season of college basketball, to have to deal with that whole entire ordeal?
Yeah, I mean, like everyone, I'm sure it was a very interesting time. I know I was actually sitting in T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas at our Pac-12 tournament when everything kind of happened, when basically the world got shut down. And, we're sitting there in the middle of a tournament and they're like, all right, well, tournament's over. We're going to go home. And then kind of as time went on, we were wondering, are we going to be able to get back to Seattle? Because, I mean, we just didn't know at that time. Um, and then for the first time, probably in 4 years, I didn't have any obligations that whole spring. They sent everyone home, and we were honestly just stuck at home for the whole spring. And I think playing a team sport like basketball, it was very weird because you get so accustomed to being around those guys every single day, year round, and we went 2 or 3 months without seeing each other. And then on top of that, once we were finally allowed to come back in about July, we still weren't technically allowed to be around each other to the full capacity. And so it was definitely a very weird feeling out process. We played my whole senior season. We played in front of nobody. We played in empty gyms, and it was just a different feel because I am a huge college basketball nut, and like the atmosphere, everything about it just gets me going. And not being able to play in front of fans, have the band there, cheerleaders, all that it was. I don't want to say a disappointment, but it was definitely it was not what I was accustomed to, and I would have loved to have my senior night in front of our student section and all that, and but luckily, I was able to have my family and my girlfriend there. But it still would have been awesome if the place would have been packed.
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing in all of that, like you mentioned, just not being around your teammates, not being around that atmosphere, everything felt very empty, right? Everything kind of felt something was missing, obviously. Something was very much so missing. And I heard a lot of people, and I've even mentioned this, that a lot of these games were kind of like glorified pickup games, if you will. I mean, there's nobody there. You have two teams playing, and it's like we're playing for something, but there's not that outside atmosphere. And I think you also probably felt how much and really appreciate how much the fans and the crowd kind of bring the life into the game, if you will. I want to ask though, with the COVID stuff and then also the traveling, you being in the Pac 12, obviously having to probably travel quite a bit. And we heard all these teams that were on these long road trips, they weren't able to go back home. I mean, did you guys run into any of those issues where you were on the road for weeks at a time, longer than you normally were?
Yeah, we had a couple, over a week long trips. Because it was one of those things where they wanted to try to fit in as many games as you could. If you were leaving town, they tried to fit in a number of games. The one benefit we had that probably other schools didn't, other mid majors and smaller schools, is we had enough money in our budget that we used to charter everywhere. So not having to fly on commercial flights, you know, staying within our bubble, as they used to call it, was very nice. So we were able to do more trips and not have to worry about, possibly getting a COVID positive test, just from some random person in the airport.
Oh yeah, I think that probably was maybe the most frightening thing for teams that were traveling. It was we're around these random people we don't know, and they could be the reason why we can't play our next game. And I think that's the most, again, unsettling, the uncertainty, just this weird cloud hovering over you that you're just like, is it going to rain? Is it not going to rain? And you just, every day is probably a new stress, if you will, that you have to deal with. But we're going to get out of that. I want to get in your career, man, because you've got such a wonderful career. And I want to really dive first into your high school career. You took and excuse me, you won 3 state titles while you were in high school, something that not a whole lot of players can say that they've done. What aspects of those teams helped you have that kind of success that you think that you all, wound up having during your time in high school?
Yeah, so I mean, I come from a very well-known high school, Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas. Lot of NBA players, ton of Division I college players, McDonald's All-Americans, all the accolades you can think of in high school basketball. I think the biggest thing for me was just I was around other guys that were very talented and that were very, serious about basketball. And I think it's one of those things where, you know, all that type of positive energy just kind of falls on top of everyone. And so we all feed off each other. I was, my junior year, I would say we were the most talented, but we had 4 McDonald's All-Americans all on the same team. And so I think that was probably the most impressive team that I was a part of in my time at Gorman. But I mean, just knowing that there's guys that are playing about 5 minutes a game who played major minutes in Division I basketball, and it doesn't get any better than that. We used to say that we were more excited for practices sometimes because the teams we played weren't very good, and so during practice is when it was really competitive. And I mean, we would get into some battles. So.
Well, I mean, having 4 McDonald's All-Americans on your team, that's, again, very rare. I'm actually from Maryland, and so DeMatha High School is a huge high school where I'm from. And I guess long time ago, there was one DeMatha team that was so good. Every single person on the team, all the players, 1 through 12, wound up playing Division I basketball. And I've always just kind of wondered, like you mentioned, the practice aspect, what are those practices like, right? I mean, you've probably had some intense battles and whatnot. I am curious, so which of those 3 titles was the most challenging for your team to win? And where did you feel that out of those 3, you guys felt the most adversity?
That's a tough question. I'm not sure that it was the toughest, but I think my senior year was definitely the most rewarding because coming off my junior year, we lost all 5 starters. Everyone went and played college basketball. We lost Steven Zimmerman, who was a McDonald's All-American, went to the NBA. We lost Chase Jeter, who was a McDonald's All-American and went and played at Duke in Arizona. And so going into senior year, it was all a bunch of guys who really weren't, main contributors other than maybe Zach Collins, who even he came off the bench as a junior, which is crazy to think, a lottery pick coming off the bench as a junior in high school. But I think that senior year, the talk around town was that, oh, Gorman's not as good. They might fall off this year. This might be the year someone gets them. And, I had so much fun. Zach and I were the team captains of that team, and being able to step into that new role and lead, and we were able to get the job done. And believe it or not, we actually had a better record my senior year with less talent than we did my junior year. So I think that was most rewarding, just because we knew that it was going to be a little bit more of a challenge, but we stepped up and executed.
Well, it's great that you guys were able to step up and, again, able to exit your high school career with 3 state titles. I mean, there's a lot of players that have never even looked at a state title, right? I mean, so that's a huge accolade in your column. But I want to get into your college decision. You wound up going to Northern Arizona, and I'm curious, what steered you into the direction of wanting to play at NAU?
Yeah, that one is interesting because I had no intentions of going to NAU like my whole senior year. They didn't recruit me. I didn't talk to them at all. My dad was at the time actually the head coach at UNLV, and my whole high school career he was the head coach there. And my whole high school career I knew in the back of my mind, I'm going to UNLV to play for my dad, and so I got some interest, not a lot, from other schools, early in high school, but shortly after, receiving some interest, my dad said, I'm in the business. If you're going to come play for me, don't waste other coaches' times. And so I said, okay. So then I basically shut down my recruitment. I knew I was going to UNLV. And about halfway through my senior year, it was in January, middle of the season, UNLV decided to go in a different direction with my dad. And so they let him go. And I was all of a sudden at the end of my senior year, had no idea where I was going to go to school. And so all the other schools that had shown interest before, they didn't have any spots left. So I was worried. I didn't know what I was going to do. And then lo and behold, just one random afternoon, the head coach at Northern Arizona, who's actually was a manager on a team or on one of the teams my dad was an assistant for way back in the day, called my dad and said, "Hey, we would love to have your son come play for us." And it just kind of seemed like a no-brainer at that point, because I knew him and I knew what he was about. And so shortly after, I went down for a visit. It's a pretty quick drive to Flagstaff, Arizona from Vegas. So went down for a visit and made the decision that's where I wanted to go.
How stressful was that process for you when, your dad left UNLV and then you're kind of left scrambling and looking around for a place to go the next year? I mean, how stressful was that process for you?
Oh, it was, it's very stressful because I was, I had the luxury of, being like, I'm going to UNLV. Anyone asks me, I'm going to UNLV. It's going to be great. I'll be in my hometown. The transition will be easy. And then all of a sudden have that dropped on you, on the back end of your senior year. You're like, what the heck do I do now? But I'm very blessed that Coach Murphy at NAU gave me that opportunity. And so I'm very thankful for that. And I'm still actually close with him to this day. So.
Well, after NAU, you actually do wind up going and playing for your dad eventually when you transfer to University of Washington. We're going to get into your dad eventually and your uncle, because you played for your uncle in high school, and I do want to ask about that, but not quite yet. When you were transferring to University of Washington, what was that process like for you, having to go through the transfer protocols and whatnot? But also, what was it like going from mid-major basketball to then high major basketball in just a year?
Yeah, so it's the reason why I left NAU. It wasn't that I didn't like my time at NAU. It was just a self-realization that, growing up, I didn't have necessarily a dream school like everyone else. Most people, they have their dream situation. I want to go play at this school and do this. I knew my dream school was wherever my dad was coaching. That was my number one goal. I wanted to play for my dad. And, my dad got to the University of Washington, and there was an opportunity to go play for him. He was an assistant there, and the head coach still there, actually, Mike Hopkins, said, yeah, we would love to have him. And so I went through that process of transferring, and I left NAU on good terms. Like I said, I'm still close with my coach at NAU, Jack Murphy. And so you asked about the transition from mid-major to high major. It's crazy how big of a difference and small of a difference it is at the same time. There are really, really good players playing, mid-major basketball who are just, there's just one or two things that they're missing that's keeping them from playing at high majors. And so when I got to the high major level, my first day, Matisse Thybulle, who plays for the 76ers, I think he probably picked 10 of my passes out of the air. And I was like, this is making no sense. Like I literally, I couldn't, I was afraid to throw the ball to anyone because I'm like, this is insane. And so basically, I think the biggest difference is just the size and athleticism of guys. At the mid-major level, I was about average height for my position. Like, I didn't feel just overwhelmed by the size and athleticism of people. But then when I got to Washington, the guys playing my position were all like 4 inches taller than me. They could jump out of the gym, and I think that was the number one thing that was kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, when I've asked people that and they've made that jump from mid-major to high major, it's always fascinated me with how large, like you said, of a difference there is, but also small. There's just really not that much that is kind of tilting the scale, if you will, for those players that are high major. It's just these one or two minor things, but those minor things, they are very obvious, right? They're very obvious things, like you mentioned, when Tyball's trying to play defense and he's just picking passes off left and right and it looks easy. You're probably playing against guys that are probably similar size to him at NAU. It was just that one or two things that he could do that those other guys couldn't, and it just really stood out. I want to now get into, you playing for your dad, you playing for your uncle. What kind of impacts have they had on your career? But then also, what was it like playing for your uncle high school wise and then playing for your dad collegiately?
Yeah, the crazy thing is, both my dad and my uncle, they are like night and day personality wise. So it was like playing for two totally different people. My uncle is more of a, he's more of a, how do I say, outgoing kind of, very fun, and he gives a lot of freedom, and so I mean, really enjoyed having him. We messed around a lot. It was a lot of fun playing for him. And then playing for my dad, he's more even keel. Um, very. He's laid back, but that he's down to business type. And so, and especially, I mean, they both were this way, but they were definitely harder on me than they were anyone else, which I appreciate now. But in the moment, you're like, oh my gosh, why am I getting yelled at for this when that other person is doing the same exact thing? But I appreciated them doing it. But I am forever thankful that I made the decision to go play for my dad, and had the opportunity to play for my uncle in high school. I think that I wouldn't have been as I don't think my career would have taken the route that it did unless I played for them. And so I'm just thankful that I did.
Now, when you're out on the court, you're in practice, game, whatever, I'm guessing you don't call them dad or uncle, right?
No, I do not. That
Okay.
is definitely the respect level. I make sure that I refer to them by their coach.
Now, when you were on the team and guys knew that, obviously, would they ever kind of make any comments about that? I mean, was that kind of a highlighted thing that, oh, the coach's son plays, or the coach's nephew plays or whatever? I mean, was that ever kind of mentioned, or was it kind of just it just didn't really matter and you guys were a team and you guys played and that was the end of it?
The one thing I actually have thanked both of them before is that they were so well respected and they did things the right way that it never became an issue. Um, I always say that my dad was one of, for most guys, that would their like go-to coach, go talk to, and he'd have their back. And so I never had to deal with someone holding a grudge at my dad, or someone holding a grudge at my uncle, so they take it out on me. I mean, I never had that issue, and I'm so thankful for it, because they handled their business, and they did stuff the right way.
Well, I think that's an important thing, right? I mean, we always hear those stories of, coaches' sons or whatever it might be, and, players get annoyed by that or whatever. And I think having that, like you said, that professionalism where you're able to separate that a little bit, that's where, again, the respect really kicks in for those coaches. Now, let's say something goes on at practice, your dad makes you run or whatever. Would that get carried over at home? I mean, when you go home, were you just like, come on, dad, why did you do that?
No, there was definitely some times where he would rip me a new one. I'm like, I would not want to talk to him. But I mean, as soon as we walked off the court, I became pretty good at compartmentalizing stuff, and making sure that, when I went back over to the house on Sundays for dinner, when my mom was cooking, that, everything was good. And so I actually have a really good relationship with my dad and my uncle. So that stuff never really got to me. I always knew that they had the best intentions for me.
You mentioned that they are very different in just how they approach the game. What was that transition like? I mean, going from playing with your uncle to then playing with your dad. I mean, was it a hard adjustment for you, or was it a pretty easy transition just because you knew the two types of people you were dealing with?
It's the one thing that is different is that, um, you're used to seeing these people in a family setting, And so I think the one thing is that once you get into the basketball setting, they are a little different because you know that they have to use some of their energy on other players. But I think at the end of the day, with any coach, really, behind the coach title, there's still a person. And so if you can build a relationship on the personable level, then I think that you can really accomplish a lot of things. And so, like I said, I have a great relationship with both of them, and so I think that we were able to accomplish a lot.
Well, it's a special thing for sure that you got to play for both your uncle and your dad. Again, hey, winning 3 state titles, my friend, playing for your uncle and your dad, you've accomplished a lot of things that a lot of basketball players, even in the NBA, probably never even accomplished. So that's a very, very impressive thing. But now you get into more basketball stuff in your career today, and you help organize AAU tournaments. And I am wildly curious, as a former AAU basketball player myself for many, 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 many years. How did you get into that, and what is kind of entailed in what you exactly do for these AAU events?
Yeah, so after my career ended, I had no idea what I was going to do because up until that point, my whole life revolved around basketball, and so I thought that the one thing I wanted to do was be around the game, and so um, looking at opportunities, I actually got in touch with someone who used to be a graduate assistant for our team at Washington, and he gave me the opportunity to kind of go this route. And he was part of this company that puts on exposure camps, AAU tournaments, stuff like that. And so talking with him, he told me about all the relationships he's been able to build, with high school coaches, AAU coaches, even college coaches. And so for me, it was just the big thing was being able to stay around the game of basketball. My since I was born, I was born October 14th, and my dad's first game was November 1st, and I was at the game at 2 or 3 weeks old. Like, so if that's not a basketball life, I don't know what is. So for me, it made sense to stay around basketball and take this career path. But at some point, I know that I do want to follow in my dad and my uncle's footsteps and become a coach myself. I know that the route to that is not always a straight shot. So I think that this is a great starting point, and then hopefully someday I can get to that level.
Now, like you mentioned, with you wanting to be a coach like your uncle and your dad, what kind of advice have you now kind of reached out to them for? I mean, as a player, you're probably asking for player advice. What can I get better on? So on and so forth. How has that advice asking, if you will, changed now that you want to get into some coaching?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is now that I'm a former player, we have way more, real conversations about, what do you need to do. And it's actually started. I felt myself really start to have a lot more real conversations my last 2 years as a player with my dad, because I knew that I was counting down the days that I was no longer going to be a player. And so being able to talk with him about what exactly you need to do, and uh, how you need to carry yourself to uh, build a good program. And um, those conversations I really enjoyed because I was able to implement them as my role as like a leader on the team. And then on top of that, just stuff that would carry over, not only in basketball, but in life in general. Just doing business with people has been very beneficial.
Well, you have two great role models to look up to. And again, having that close relationship with them, I think that's going to be very important. And now being in AAU basketball, I mean, that's also really exciting. What are some challenges, some exciting aspects? I mean, what are kind of some pros and cons to what you do? Because, hey, again, as a former AAU basketball player, I know kind of how that stuff works, right? You have early morning games, somebody doesn't show up, you have these late games, you have to deal with the gyms, so on and so forth. Pros and cons to what you're doing, basically.
I mean, pro number one is that it's basketball. My job is basketball, so that part is so exciting to me. I get to, I get to be on the phones, talk to people who are up and coming stars in this game. And so being able to be around them is awesome. And then obviously the cons with AAU is, I mean, you've played it, you know how hectic it can get. And it's, you know, you have these events and you try to fit, you know, hundreds of games in a weekend. And so it is a very hectic business, but I think that, you know, throwing yourself in the fire and just embracing the challenges is number one.
Yeah, throwing yourself in the fire definitely is the most important thing. That's the only way you learn, in my opinion. That's the only way you learn. You have to mess up, you have to do something wrong in order to learn and to get better. There's just no other way around it. You're not going to just inherently know how to do it. And if you do, well, then you're probably some famous celebrity or whatever. You know, I don't know, but you have to go through that trial and tribulation to then come out on the other end very successful. So, and also, like I mentioned, AAU basketball, I mean, it was some of the most exciting times of my life. I mean, I loved AAU basketball, made great friendships out of it, lots of wonderful memories, and just the road trips, going to the tournaments. No, I didn't like when we'd lose one game and then the next day you had to play a back to back to back to back just to get back into the winner's bracket. But that was the fun of it. You did have a lot of cramps during those days. But anyways, Travis, you've been an absolute blast to have on the show, my friend. I want to ask you one last question before I let you run. And it involves kind of this realization, sports epiphany, whatever you want to call it. And I'm curious, when did you kind of have this sports epiphany or this realization that you could take your talents to the Division I level and that you could really fulfill that goal of playing D1 basketball?
You know, it's interesting. That's actually a very interesting question because I I was the type of guy, I thought I had all the answers. You know, I got interest from college. I even got to go play Division One. I didn't think that I could be a Division One player until probably halfway through my freshman year of college, because I showed up on campus and we talked about the jump from mid major to high major being so small. The jump from high school to college is giant. My first week or two going through workouts and stuff, my confidence level literally was rock bottom because these were all juniors and seniors. They had played, you know, 3-4 years of college basketball and they were just whooping my tail. And I'm like, I suck. I don't know what I was thinking that I could play college basketball. And then, you know, all of a sudden just you keep working every single day and then one day it just clicks and then you have a really good day and you're like, you know what, maybe I can do this. And then you start to get your confidence back. And I think for me, I am very proud of the fact that every single year I felt like I improved. It's one of those things where you watch game film and you watch tape and of years in the past and you're like, man, if I could go back, if I knew what I know now, then I could be so much better. And so I think for me, it was maybe a little bit of stubbornness before I got to college. And then once I got to college, it was, you know, having to hit that rock bottom of, you know what, you're not as good as you think you are. And so then, you know, you just keep building yourself up. And I'm very proud of the career that I had. I was like, I won 3 state championships. I won a Pac-12 championship. I got to play in the NCAA tournament against North Carolina. And so, I mean, a lot of stuff to be proud of. And it was not an easy path, but I'm very, very proud of how my career went.
All right, I have before I actually let you go, I do have to ask. You mentioned all 3 of those things: Pac-12 championship, state title, NCAA tournament. If you had to rank those, how would you rank those in terms of just maybe excitement, maybe just enjoyment, whatever it might be? How would you rank those huge events in your college basketball career and high school basketball career?
Man, that's so hard.
I wouldn't make it
I
easy for you, man. I wouldn't make it easy for you.
I think number one's got to be March Madness because that is like, I mean, that's the top, that's the cream of the crop right there. You know, like there are great players. I mean, there's players in the NBA that are all stars that never got to play in March Madness. And then that's tough because can I go a 2A and 2B for the Pac-12 championship and the state championships? Because I mean,
I
those
can
are
do that. Yeah, I can do that. I'll let that slide.
Yeah, because I mean, just being part of those teams and winning. I mean, those are lifelong memories that I'll never forget. So
Well, you have a lot of lifelong memories from your basketball career, and you get to continue to be in basketball. Like you said, hey, your job is basketball, right? I mean, how cool is that? I mean, hey, my job's being sports. It's unbelievable, right? I have an excuse when my girlfriend wants to watch something else on TV. No, I have to actually watch sports. Like this is actually important for what I am doing. So I'm sure you have those same conversations with loved ones where you're like, hey, I need to actually watch this game. Like this is important for me. So we get to use those in our favor at times. But Travis, it's been a joy to chat with you, my friend. Thanks so much for joining the program. Always welcome back. Come back anytime, share so many stories because I'm sure you have a ton. But until next time, my friend, good luck moving forward and good luck with the AAU events, man. I hope nothing goes really weird with the next year. Hopefully, we get some more AAU basketball going.
thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the time.